Our guest on Veterans Chronicles is Don Irwin. He's a veteran of World War II, serving in the U.S. Navy, and saw action at or near many of the major events in the Pacific Theater. And Don, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Where were you born and raised, sir?
California, Eureka.
And that's in the northern
Northern part.
All right. When did you join the service?
June 1941.
Okay, so that's before the war started. Why did you join the service, and why did you pick the Navy?
It was my preference to be in the water.
Okay. Fantastic. Now, you were near Pearl Harbor when it was attacked.
We came in December the 8th.
So you were close by.
Yes. But during the part of December the 7th, well, we were on patrol.
When did you hear about it?
We ran into a storm, and during the storm, well, we heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. So we loaded up with torpedoes and bombs.
And you then went to Pearl Harbor, though. What did you see? What was it like?
The water was covered with oil, and it still had a few fires going on. Looking for the two-man submarine.
And what were the people like there, the other service members?
Well, all of the Marines were on the banks looking for any object that came by that wasn't part of our group. And we did supplies all night. And every time we went by, well, the Marines fired the machine guns over our head. Enterprise motor launch with provisions. Carry on.
So it sounds like everyone was already on a war footing. The shock was maybe starting to wear off at that point?
Not really.
No. So then where did you go?
Well, Walter Winchell found out that we came in at dusk and left early before sunrise. And he called the Enterprise the Galloping Ghost from Oahu Coast. And so we made a logo representing the Enterprise Galloping Ghost from Oahu Coast.
Very nice. And so where did you head out to from there?
We went over and made a raid on the Marshall Islands, and he had a bunch of Japanese bombers flew over the top, and I was a lookout at the time, and the captain on the bridge timed it just about right, made a turn, and the bombs hit where we would have been. And all of a sudden, we had a Japanese bomber that came in down low, out of the group, evidently, and scraped his wingtip along the flight deck, and then hit the water. I have no idea what his intent was.
Yeah, that was before the kamikazes were flying.
Well, that was before Kamikaze started.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then Marshall Islands, then you went to Wake Island, is that right?
We, before the war started, we delivered airplanes to Wake and Midway.
You then, in the spring of 1942, you rendezvoused with the Hornet, correct?
Yes, the Doolittle raid.
Right. And what was your role there?
I was still a lookout, and I saw the first report was there was a mast on the horizon, but the mast was doing this. So that meant there was not on the horizon, but it was wound up being a Japanese picket ship in between the Hornet and the Enterprise. And we started firing, and we had to quit because our shells were ricocheting off, headed for the Hornet. So a heavy cruiser with 8-inch a blast came out of formation and blasted and backed off, and then the Helena number 50 light cruiser, it opened up. And a splash, and the Pickett was still going, and then it was out of sight and finally sunk.
Did you get to watch the planes take off from the Hornet?
I did, and I found out 50 years later why the seventh one almost hit the drink, if you saw the movie.
And why is that?
Okay. But he forgot to put his flaps down and didn't have the lift.
That'll do it.
So there were 16 of them, and that's why we had to launch the airplanes early, because we didn't know if the picket ship got the message out or not.
Did you get the sense at the time of how significant the Doolittle raid was, or did that only come later?
Well, I knew basically that we wanted Japan to know we were in the war.
Absolutely right. So that's April of 1942. Early June, the Battle of Midway, which the Enterprise was there
4th,
for.
5th, and 6th. Yeah. Well, the Japanese code had already been broken, and they tried to make us think that they were going to go up to Kiska area and do an invasion. And one way we were sure that it was Midway is they had a unit break down at Midway, and we put it out, and the Japanese picked it up, and then they had a code for Midway. So we knew that they were going to hit Midway. So we patrolled for 3 days waiting for them to make their first launch.
And then what happened?
Well, we sent 14 torpedo planes out, and a group of SPD dive bombers, and the torpedo planes found the target first, and the SPD felt that they'd gone too far, and they circled back, and that's when the dive bombers really did the damage on the carriers. We never got any of our torpedo planes back. They were all shot down.
All of them?
Yeah, all 14.
So then what?
In the meantime, the Yorktown was being hit, and they couldn't land aircraft, and so some of the airplanes from the Yorktown landed on the Enterprise.
And what are you doing this whole time?
Making reports to the captain every time an airplane came in.
So you were busy.
Yeah, well, we had one, and no indication from the pilot what he was thinking, but he nosed up and released the bomb. The bomb flew over the flight deck and hit the water. Well, we don't know what the object was in the pilot's mind when he pulled up. Airplane was beautifully painted, orange and red, and yellow with the red dot in it. Very plain. And so it went down probably 300 feet off the port side.
That's amazing.
Had a camera set up in the bridge, and the photographer was someplace else, and the camera took all the pictures on its own where a bomb went down in and exploded on the port side and knocked out the 5-inch 38 guns and exploded the ammunition that was in the hoist. And it showed bodies going into the water.
So what are you doing now? Was there a call to abandon the ship?
No.
The ship was not crippled.
Enterprise lived through the whole war, never did get sunk. But we lost 99 men, and we buried them at sea in canvas bag and weight.
how did the rest of the battle play out for you?
Well, we went back into Pearl Harbor and had repairs. And when we went into dry dock, we had a torpedo crease on the side of our ship about 30 feet long, and the torpedo never went off, but it had a crease.
Amazing. You know how many close calls you missed?
There's a lot of close calls.
It's amazing. Okay, so you got fixed up at Pearl Harbor, and then where did you go?
Well, we went into the battle down in Guadalcanal, and we had more action take place there. We had an Iowa-class battleship came alongside and took a torpedo for us, and we went into a French island, Noumea, and the battleship flooded the good side, put the bad side up, welded new plates on, pumped the water out, and they were ready for action again. We operated out of Noumea, Espiritu Santos Island, and the reason we were there is to chase the Japanese out of New Guinea, where they were making invasions into Australia. So that was the reason we went there.
So now you're in the South Pacific, and how long were you there? At Guadalcanal and the surrounding area?
You probably operated there for about 5 months.
And then the Solomons after that?
Well, that was the Solomons.
All
Guadalcanal
the
is
same
the Solomon
campaign.
Islands.
Okay, so then shortly after that, you switched ships, is that right?
That's true.
Okay, so what ship was next?
Well, we went on to an AK, what they call the Kaiser cement ship. Put that in commission in San Pedro. And one of my first jobs was to climb up onto the mast and run a line through the pulley so we could do the rigging on the booms. We towed a floating machine shop so that the ships in the Pacific could make repairs without coming clear back to Pearl.
Smart. And so
That was 10 months.
10 months that.
Then after that, well, we went over to it's a Navy station at San Francisco there, and we got assigned to going up and put a destroyer in commission in Seattle, Washington. So we did another brand new ship commission at Seattle, and then floated over to Bremerton and outfitted it with torpedoes and whaleboats and that kind of thing.
Then where did you go?
We went to Pearl Harbor, and we got a paint job that was due to go to Kiska up in the Aleutians. And they put heaters. I was mount captain on the 5-inch 38, had a crew of 4, and that was canceled, and so we took off and headed for Iwo Jima. At Iwo Jima, we anchored close to shore and gave the Marines fire support, star shells during the night, and then we got hit by 4 shells that came in. One of them hit our torpedo tube, and the shrapnel killed one guy with shrapnel in his back. We went to the Tinian group and got another torpedo tube, and we're ready to go again. So we came back to patrol in Iwo Jima, and I got to see both of the Iwo Jima flags go up. You got the bottle there, hon? This is Iwo Jima sand, and it has the insignia here engraved of the Marines putting the flag up. There was a small flag, and I saw that one, and then I saw the big flag go up later.
Hold it up again for a moment, please. Thank you. Just hold it steady.
Okay?
Very good, thank you.
Okay. So, when we came back from Tinian after getting the torpedo tubes replaced, well, we picked up a group of LSTs and landing craft and headed for Okinawa.
Let's back up to Iwo Jima just a minute, because obviously as you get closer to Japan, their fighting intensifies. They're getting more and more desperate. Are you sensing that from being on the ship offshore?
The object of the Japanese was to kill as many Americans as they could, and hoping for an armistice. So the fighting was last-ditch standing for the Japanese and kill as many Americans as they could. Well, one thing at Iwo Jima I saw was a Iowa-class battleship, and a torpedo plane was coming in to drop a torpedo at the battleship, and the battleship turned broadside, and the airplane came through the air burst from the shells, and it was a frame. He hit the drink. The battleship also knocked out a tunnel on the east side of the island that had twin six on a railroad track. And they knocked that out and covered up the tunnel.
Okay. You mentioned then after that you were on to Okinawa, correct?
Yes. Escorting the LST, and we made a mock landing on the west side of the island, which was the high side, and got off a few shots to imitate that we were going to make a landing, and then backed off, and then we were assigned to picket duty. This is where the radioman picked up kamikazes and that were headed for the fleet, and so the out of 30 ships sunk there in the war at Okinawa, 22 of them were picket ships, of which we were one of them. And before we got sunk, we had an emergency call from the destroyer Bush. And the Bush was sinking when we got there. And on Mount 4, there was a Japanese wing that was laying up alongside of the enclosed mount. And I thought to myself, that's a bad indication for my mount. And so we shot down some kamikazes, and which is they called divine wind. And if you go back in history, the Chinese in sailboats were making an invasion on Japan. And a storm came up, and the Japanese called the storm their divine wind. And so the kamikazes was their divine wind. So we took a hit, and my mount was the last one to take a blast at the last airplane that came in. And it came in from the bow at around a 30-degree angle. And we're in manual. Our power had been knocked out. So the pointer and trainer had to do everything manually. And we got one shot off. And there was no angle of the airplane. It was right straight at us. And I found out later that the 40 millimeter above me, a guy jumped off and went 14 feet down because he knew he was going to get hit. And after we got that shot, went one shot off, I closed the hatch, and the fellows inside the mount, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Hang on." And then I found out later that the right wheel on the Kamikaze got knocked off, and it made him veer, and he hit on the port side in the water, and we had shrapnel bounce off of our mount. I opened up the hatch and took a look, and the water was running red underneath us, and a piece of the Kamikaze pilot was drooped over the hand line. So that's how close it was to us. Then we got the word to abandon ship, and that caused another leak. We had a leak up forward, and this last bomb created a leak again. So we had the word to abandon ship, jumped on a small landing craft, and we lost one sailor. He fell in between when he jumped, and it crushed him. And we went into Okinawa Harbor and got on an AK, and the Japanese swam out, climbed up on the anchor chain and killed somebody and jumped back in the water. And so that point on, all the ships in there had a guard, so that in case the Japanese come up, they'd shoot them before they got on board ship.
Wow. So, okay, you got on the landing craft. So how did you get back?
Well, the AK took us back to San Francisco, yeah.
When you think back to all these close calls and all these major engagements you were part of, and how close you came, and obviously others didn't, what comes to mind?
Well, it's hard to answer. I read the book, the Last Battle of Okinawa, and Ultimate Battle it's called. And I asked my wife, I said, am I too old to make a bucket list? And she said, "No, what's on your mind?" So I said, well, let's go to Okinawa, and I'll put a wreath in the water for my shipmates. And I was interviewed there by USO and the American Legion, and it made me think about how fortunate I was when I was being interviewed there. I had a mother and a little girl come up to me and asked me what my charm was, and they caught me flat-footed. Pause.
Sure. Take your time.
And the little girl asked me if I had a charm, and I don't know where it came from, but I said, I know how you can get a charm. Get good grades at school and mind your mother.
What a sweet moment.
Yeah. So we went to the memorial site in Okinawa where anybody, including the enemy, their names were put on a memorial granite rocks, probably about 2 acres. So the Japanese had 110,000 Koreans there fighting against us, and 120,000 Japanese fighting against it. And I had the opportunity of going through all the tunnels that they had, underground tunnels. And the tunnel that the American soldiers were coming into, they stacked up dead bodies and limbs and what have you. So the oncoming Americans had to go through a big mess to chase the Japanese. Yeah.
What struck you about the tunnel system? Most Americans, other than the ones who fought there 70 years ago, have never seen them. How elaborate were they? How deep? How long?
Well, rephrase it.
How long? What was your impression of these tunnels that I know they built elsewhere?
Yeah,
Also.
well, it's Okinawa is just rock, so they had to dig a lot of tunnels, and we saw the main battle stations underground where the command was, and they had 2 Japanese that were running the Battle of Okinawa, and one of them he wanted to do banzai, which the early islands, that's the way they operated, just make a mad dash. And the other one was more like defense. And so the defense ran out, and that made it tough.
One of the things I read about you is that you were part of a group from the ship that went down that created reunions on a regular basis.
Yeah. We had a fellow that made captain while he was a reserve, and he ran the Calhoun Association. And we got together once a year and went to a Navy base. And then my wife and I, my better half, we ran it for a while, and then it got down to where it was just 4 sailors that were still able to get up and get around. So we canceled it.
But how many years did you meet together? Many, right?
I can't remember how many, but a few.
Quite a few.
So then we had something like $1,300 in the kitty, and I gave it to the veterans in Kansas City.
So what was it like for you after being in so many of these different engagements when August of 45 came and we won the war?
Well, I was able to not have a mental problem, and when I retired from the telephone company, well, my son asked me what I was going to do during my retirement years, and he put me to work out at the ranch raising Black Angus for 5 years.
Nice.
So then I bought property in Idaho, and I built a cabin in Idaho.
Okay. But the relief must have been palpable when you heard that the Japanese surrendered.
That was a cheer. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sir, what does it mean to you that you can share this story now? Do you speak often to groups and schools and things like that?
Well, that's another interesting comment. One of my shipmates is in Nebraska, and he's been in touch with an American that retired in Vienna, Austria. And I got pictures from Vienna, Austria of my ship, the Enterprise, and the Calhoun. And so I signed the pictures and sent them back to him. And so I'm on page 4 of writing what we're talking about here.
Fantastic. Last question. What are you most proud of from your service to our country?
Well, that I was able to do it. Yeah. I appreciate our country and happy to be an American.
Wonderful. We're glad you are. Thanks to those like you,
Okay.
we were able to win. Mr. Irwin, thank you so much for your service to our country. Thank you for your time today, and enjoy the weekend. Honor to meet you, sir.
Bet.